Hello everybody, my name is Jordan, also known as JMonster, and welcome back. Today I have a 4v4 on Silmarillion Total War, and this is going to pick up the discussion more or less where I left it off on my stream on the 31st of December. I was talking about new skirmisher types, and you're going to get to see them in action today. And of course, what better way to show that off than by playing OSSIRIAND. So I'll be playing OSSIRIAND in this battle. I've brought 3 units of the Hunters of Rathloriel, and I'm going to go into quite a lot of detail when it comes to like the new changes and things like that, especially for OSSIRIAND, because if you guys are fans of the Green Elves and you want to get into playing them, well then you probably want to listen to this part in particular, because there is some very exciting stuff that has come in the new patch. I mean, subject to change before release, but I'm pretty confident that the concept is good, and it hopefully won't have to be changed in any really significant way. But in any case, I have brought 3 units of the Hunters of Rathloriel. They are now bumped up to 3 capped instead of 2. They've got a little bit of extra range of 105, I believe, over the regular 100. And they are, of course, the harassment javelins that I spoke of. The basic idea is lots of ammo and low damage, but you pair that with greater range than other targets. So, one of the things that OSSIRIAND now therefore lacks is a hard javelin unit. So the hard javelins, as I'm going to call them, versus the harassment javelins, have the standard 3 ammunition that javs have had basically forever in Silmarillion Total War, but their damage has been increased to 10 armor piercing. There is a little bit of differences as well in the way that the projectiles work on a mechanical level. The heavier javelins are slower in flight than the lighter harassment javelins. So if you're using them against, say, an elephant, for example, the dynamic still exists where if you're microing your elephants well, you can kind of matrix neo-dodge things if you're paying attention and your opponent is just sort of like setting and forgetting. Or not trying to tie down your elephants, for example, with chaff infantry and letting them sort of chunk through them while they assassinate them from range. So, yeah, that's probably the biggest thing. They've also, javelins generally have gotten a little bit more accurate as well, to compensate for the slower projectile speeds on some of the javs, and that's just so it's not super easy. It was already like you could pay attention and you could micro elephants well, and it was like very hard to hit something without any sort of pinning action, even if like it was only just like kind of moving or just like moving forward and trying to get under the arc. So now it's a little bit easier, but not significantly. So that sort of dynamic has been maintained. It's just a little bit more forgiving for the hard javelins because they have so little ammunition now. Well, it's same ammunition, but relatively they have far less ammunition than a harassment javelin. In any case, I got 3 of them. I'm going to be using them very aggressively. And one of the things I noticed in this battle is that the Hunters of Rathloriel synergize so well with other units on the Green Elf roster, and you're going to see a lot of that today. I've got a second line here composed of 3 scouts of Gelion. These are the main line archers in the patch as well. They've got a little bit of extra ammunition. It's about +2, so they have 18 instead of 16, which is significant, as the scouts of Gelion are sort of your main line archer. They're going to be the thing that does bow skirmishing, that Green Elf hallmark, for the longest period of time. So it's important that they have enough longevity to get the job done. In behind them, I've got 2, maybe it's 3 Spear Hosts of Rathloriel. Yes, indeed, it is 3 Spear Hosts of Rathloriel. And I'm happy to say that they finally have a niche relative to the Hunters. I didn't see a lot of people bringing them, and one of the things I wanted to pay attention to in this new sort of skirmisher overhaul is that we still maintain distinctions between them and other infantries that they do sort of like resemble in certain ways. So the Hunters of Rathloriel now have 6 shield value instead of the 7 that the Spearmen of Rathloriel have, and the melee defense distinction has been increased a little bit. Hunters have 9, previously the Spear Host had 10, but now the Spear Host has 11, and it really makes a huge difference. In addition, the Spear Hosts are a good deal cheaper, so it's much easier to put chevrons on them in a economically effective way. So something you could, by that I mean it's something you can build into your compositions without having to sacrifice too much in order to put chevrons on things, whereas the Hunters of Rathloriel are quite expensive to put chevrons on. The final thing is that the Hunters of Rathloriel do not have the same morale shock response that the Spearmen do. The Spearmen are less likely, therefore, to rout if they are caught in a sort of disadvantageous position. That being said, they both have 15 morale, which is fairly low for the Elves. That's, I think, about as low as it gets. So routing can still be a problem for the Green Elves. They can find themselves overwhelmed in close quarters. But the playstyle that you're going to see a lot in this game that is really, really effective, and I think the best way for the Green Elves to be played, regardless of your composition, is pinning things in place and then using your other missile units. And this is where positioning and like knowing, what you want to do, what you want to goad your enemy into doing, become really, really important. So I think the new change, especially for OSSIRIAND, does add a ton, and I'm super excited to show you guys how it played out today. But in any case, yep, 3 units of Hunters of Rathloriel, 3 Scouts of Gelion, and 3 Spearhost of Rathloriel with a Chevron upgrade. Second line here going to be composed of the Urfinen Tower, because of course. Urfinen Tower, super important to adding any sort of killing power to your infantry lineup. So if you do think that you're going to end up in a situation where you need to go toe-to-toe with somebody, and with the Green Elves that will eventually happen because you will run out of ammunition, then it's a good idea to bring some Urfinen Tower, or to bring the slightly cheaper 1 HP bodyguard unit, whose name I can't remember. I think it's the Mythern and Tolgalen, as they do have an armor upgrade in this particular patch. And a lot of other units did have that added to them, a lot of like heavy infantry units especially, and that's to make it worth it to have heavy infantry. I've talked a lot about light infantry and a lot of the like bonuses that you get from bringing light infantry, but at the same time, I can't give them all of that without doing something for some of the heavy infantry. So the Green Elves are one of those factions. There's about 4 or 5 others as well that receive some additional armor upgrades. But those are not visual. It's just a purely practical thing. So now you can bring a small but expensive core of some of that heavy infantry as the Green Elves, and you can make them a little bit tankier, which is nice. It's done a lot for the Mythern in an open field battle, and I think you're going to see them a little bit more, and it does give you, therefore, some options on whether or not you want to bring Urfinen Tower, who are more numerous and more expensive, or if you want to bring the Mythern, who are less numerous, less expensive, but smaller in number, and you can make them a little bit tankier. So there's a choice there now to be had between the 2 units, whereas before I think it was edging a little bit in favor of the Urfinen Tower. I've also got some Outriders of Dweilwyn here, and I'm parking them exactly where I'm expecting an infantry fight to eventually take place. I really like to do this is like keep a unit of Outriders behind my lines, and then once the enemy gets close, because they hide everywhere, then you can, depending on who you're fighting, of course, you need to bear that in mind when you're positioning these guys for these kinds of ambushes. But if there's not a lot of like spear, like halberd units or pikes or whatever, then you can launch a quick opportunistic attack into the front of units, and you need to pick your targets wisely, obviously. Don't pick something with a lot of MD, otherwise it's not going to pay off for you. But you can launch that quick ambush across your line where people don't really look for them. They expect cavalry to come around the wings and things like that. And you can get a decent amount of value with them, and then retreat them before your enemy can do anything about it. I've also got a couple units of Sentries of Gelion as well. They're going to be important for pairing with my Hunters of Rathloriel, and as I said, they synergize super well with a lot of the Green Elf roster, not just the Horse Archers, but I think the Horse Archers plus Hunters of Rathloriel as sort of a vanguard against certain factions is going to be something that you see a lot moving forward into new patches of Silmarillion and Total War. Next, we have the Kinsmen of Death, who have greatly changed. They are no longer the legendary company for OSSIRIAND. They are more of a standard sort of mainline unit, and they've been elevated to the status of bodyguard tier. And there's a very good reason for that, and that's because the Rangers are no longer bodyguards, but we'll talk about them in just a moment. But yeah, so the Kinsmen of Denethor, they're no longer locked morale. They do still have slashing damage, and they have 1 HP bodyguard tier stats, which is great. And they also have a morale buff baked into the unit. So when you mix them onto the front line, especially when you have Spearhost of Rathloriel with chevrons, which, as I mentioned, is a very economical option for a unit that I think you're going to want to bring much more often now, it does give you a very, very solid line. Not a lot of killing power. These units will lose out to most like non-spear infantry. It's just a matter of time, really. But the Kinsmen of Denethor do help give you a tiny bit of extra damage there. Their damage isn't massive, but it does increase the longevity of these units even further, and that can be everything when you are playing as the Green Elves. Again, pin and shoot is the name of the game for the Green Elves, and I think that's for the best, really. Next, we have the new legendary company for the Elves of OSSIRIAND, which, surprise, they're getting a new one. The Ondo Hyando and Sarn Athrad are the Stone Hewers of Sarn Athrad, and this is being added to the Green Elf faction in anticipation of some very heavily armored adversaries who will hopefully be coming soon to the mod. You may have guessed it already. That would be the Dwarves or the Naugrim. So the Ondo Hyando are being added so that the Green Elves have an opportunity to beat the Dwarves, whereas otherwise, because the Dwarves will be very, very focused on shield and armor as opposed to melee defense, as many other factions in the game are, it does become necessary for the Green Elves to be given some options a little bit preemptively. And this is also being added because their matchup against the Sons of Feyenoord is very, very difficult in a lot of cases. So I'm just going to go ahead and pause this here because we're getting into the replay, and I really want to go over things in detail so that everyone is kind of well informed moving into future replays about what everything is and what it does. So the Ondo Hyando have been added to give them a chance against the Sons of Feyenoord. To even the scales a little bit, well, still, obviously things are going to go in favor of the Sons of Feyenoord because that's everything the Green Elves fear. High armor and high mobility makes it very difficult to kite people forever, whereas a faction like, say, Fingolfin is much more susceptible to that because the mobility that they do have is either unshielded or quite lightly armored. And the Green Elves can take care of that with mobility. But Feyenoord is very tough for them that way, and this won't totally turn that dynamic on its head, but it will help out. So the Ondo Hyando are a upper mid-tier legendary company, so they're not like a super high-tier unit like, say, the Kinslayers of Alqualande, for example, and they're sort of a variant of the Skirmishers of Rathloriel. And to that end, they are a bit different. So you're going to get increased damage in close quarters as they do dual-wield axes, and they have very, very high charge values, which can be quite useful for them. They can also hide anywhere, which is great, as you'll be able to keep them relatively safe from skirmishers until you are ready to reveal their presence, and that's very much a thematic thing for the Elves of OSSIRIAND. The downside over using these guys over the Skirmishers of Rathloriel is that you're also losing a lot of ammunition. Oh, they have AP arrows as well. So you're trading off higher damage, AP arrows, the ability to hide anywhere for lower range, lower speed, lower numbers, and an increased cost over the Skirmishers of Rathloriel. So they're not a replacement, and you're not necessarily going to want to bring them in every matchup as well. Like, you're not going to need the Ondo Hyando in, say, a fight against Tolin Gaudenhoth, for example, who has very, very few heavily armored units. They have one heavily armored cav, and you can deal with that in a whole bunch of different ways. You have plenty of spears, plenty of that other stuff. That's not it's not as necessary to have the AP arrows when fighting against Tolin Gaudenhoth, for example, or the Halidin, or other things like that. That being said, they are really good for sniping out like lighter and medium cav as well because of the high damage high damage that AP basically gives them. It's a force multiplier. But you will definitely want that sort of armor piercing against the dwarves. So yeah, there are some trade-offs there. They lose about 20 range, they lose 40 men in the unit, and they're far more expensive, and they're actually slower as well, so they're easier to catch out with cavalry and mobility. So far from being a superior unit in every way to the Skirmishers of Rathloriel, the Ondo Hyando certainly do have a number of drawbacks and weaknesses that will determine whether or not you want to bring them. So the choice is still there. Now I have one more unit hiding out here in the wings. I've got the Randirim and Tol Galen. So they are no longer a bodyguard tier unit. They're quite difficult to fit into a lot of compositions. And I think now that they're just a high tier unit and they've gone down from 1100 Mirian to 740, you're going to be able to fit them into a lot more compositions, and that's going to give OSSIRIAND basically the length and breadth of almost every skirmisher type in the game. So you've got body piercing, you've got armor piercing, you've got high damage, you've got high accuracy, good range, and that sort of thing. The only thing you're really missing is hard target javelins, because of course you have the harassment skirmishers. So, whew, that was a marathon. That is a lot to learn about the Elves of OSSIRIAND, but that's going to be important, I think, to understanding the analysis of this game and why I use the things that I use and how I use them. Moving on now to my ally, we have the House of Feyenoord, who are not super changed in this. I will go through a small list of changes that they have gotten in this battle as we go through their army composition. He's got 2 units of the Archers of Amrod with no armor upgrade, so the bog standard kind. You have a catapult here, and that's going to be really, really nice because he's fighting against Fingolfin, and they are very formation-based. He's also got 2 Riders of the Pass. These guys have been changed a little bit. Their missile damage went from 6 to 7, and that's basically the entirety of their change. And that's going to be significant in this matchup against Fingolfin, as you'll find out when we go through the Fingolfin armies. He's also got 2 companies of the Defenders of Aglon. He's upgraded them, I believe, fully. He's got some Accursed of Alqualande as well. This is the legendary company for the House of Feyenoord. In brief, they are a variant of the Defenders of Aglon, who focus more on their armor than their melee defense, and therefore extremely weak to cavalry charges, extremely weak to armor piercing in close quarters, and naturally you can bring them down from range with hard target javelins. So yeah, again, weaknesses, drawbacks, you're not necessarily going to want to bring them in every fight over the Defenders of Aglon. They are a little bit more expensive as well, as are many of the Sons of Feyenoord units, so it can be hard to balance that out. You got to make sure you get good value off them. He's also got, I believe, 4 companies of the Footmen of Amras, which he has deployed in loose formation, probably fearing some artillery volleys from the other side. And they are all fully upgraded with their second armor upgrade, one of the few factions that can do so. So extremely tanky. In behind his infantry corps, he's got some O-Torn Mightymo. And hiding back here in the woods, he's got a couple of detachments of the Stalkers of Thargelion, and there's also a Ranger of Helivorn, which are the hard target javelins, and that means 10 damage, lower range, and 3 ammunition, but they can really shred smaller, heavily armored targets like bodyguards, elephants, and certain heavy infantry units, especially when you manage to completely bypass the shield value by positioning them on your wings. He's got a second company of them hanging out over here as well, and I think that's pretty well it for his army. It's quite small, very infantry focused, and therefore lacking in a little bit of versatility, and the only cavalry that he's brought this time are the horse archers, so it's an interesting build. I think the idea here is to utilize this hill. That's going to be the best thing that he can do with the armies that he's brought, is utilize the hill here and just try and hold out for as long as he can against the House of Fingolfin. So yeah, I think that's everything he's brought. And then we have the House of Finarfin, who've undergone some pretty significant changes as well, and I will go through those as we see the units in game today. So, Stalkers of Talotheran and Falroth, basically the same as they've always been. They have had their animation rather, changed a little bit, so they're not so shy about getting into close quarters. We were experimenting with some animations from Europa Barbarorum 2, but we switched it back to the Medieval 2 generic vanilla ones because they're just more effective in combat for what you need that unit to do. Next we have the Wardens of Nargothrond, who have traded off their piercing damage, which most spears have, and I'll briefly explain the dynamic there. Basically, piercing versus slashing damage does have an influence on combat resolution, with piercing units having a sort of built-in, what's the best word for it? A built-in like debuff, basically, when fighting against the slashing units. So the Wardens previously were piercing like 90% of all spears in the game, but they have had that switched to slashing damage. So now they're a little bit deadlier. They still have a lot of the drawbacks of spears, specifically their very low charge damage and their very low base damage, but they do have a fast animation that kind of makes up for that. So it gives Finarfin a little bit of extra killing power in a way that is truly Finarfin. Next we have the Defenders of Talotheran, who are now a hard target javelin unit capped at 2. They've also gotten smaller, gone from 140 to 123, and they use skirmisher templates rather than infantry, so they're less powerful and able to hold a line in close quarters. They're not really a line infantry unit nearly as much anymore, but they do have that javelin, which can be very devastating, again, into small, heavily armored targets, elephants, bodyguards, etc., etc. Out in front here, looks like he's got a couple more companies of the Stalkers of Talotheran and Falroth, and his front line is going to be made up of Swordsmen of Talotheran, who are basically the same, but they've gotten a little bit less expensive, and their unit cap has also gone up as well before you hit the red price. So you will be able to bring more mid-tier swordsmen with the House of Finarfin, and that's because I want the House of Finarfin to be a little bit more mid-tier and numbers-focused than the other houses of the Noldor, to represent the fact that Feyenoord actually controlled a much larger territory than the rest of the Noldor princes. So the armies that they're going to field are larger, but they're not of the same quality, because the Swords of Talotheran are just kind of okay. The Stalkers aren't bad, but there's lots of drawbacks to them, like the lightly armored nature of the unit and their lack of shield. But you will be able to sort of flood the field with a lot more chaff units, like the Swords of Talotheran, and then you can back them up with Wardens of Nargothrond and some of the other smaller, more expensive Warden and Bridge Warden units that Finarfin can bring. You have a detachment of the Wardens of Nargothrond here as well, and, quite refreshingly, a single pike from the House of Finarfin. And that's, I think, one of the best things about this change, is that it's going to encourage you to bring more than just the standard Finarfin loadout, where you take a couple of Wardens and you take a couple of pikes, and you build the rest of your army around that. This is going to allow you more flexibility with your build, and potentially even a rush army if the situation is right for it, and the opponent that you're facing makes sense to bring that sort of build against. So that's pretty cool. Over in the back here, we have some Marquetti Moor McGilwell, one of the few very obviously offensively oriented units in the House of Finarfin lineup. And then we have the Company of Prince Windor, which are a mid-tier legendary company. Again, another mid-tier LC. And they're sort of a variant of the Swordsmen of Talotheran. A little bit better armor, better shields, really high charge value. They're also impetuous, so they can charge without orders. And they have a crazy charge distance and a base damage upgrade. But they are more expensive, and they do lose the missile damage that the Swordsmen of Talotheran have, which can be, a little bit situational. So there is like sort of a difference there. Some of the other things that they do is fear. Fear is one of the other big ones, and they're a little bit larger. Yeah, so Company of Prince Windor, nice little flavor unit. I think I've explained the story behind them a few times, so I won't go into it now because it's already getting long. More Wardens, more Defenders on the other wing, and then another unit of Stalkers out front here, and that's the Finarfin army. Very mid-tier focused. Not nearly as much heavy armor on the field today, which is refreshing to see for House of Finarfin. Let's move in to the final faction here, which has also got some... Ooh, wow, too many trees on this map. Final faction here, which has also got some big changes that came to it with this skirmisher overhaul. And that is, of course, the Elves of the Falas, and they're being played by Safi today. He's got a couple of Ranger detachments out front, totaling one full unit. He's got a mixed front line here of Seafarers of Brithlombar, which are the Mace unit, and the Nobles of Balar. In behind him, he's got Spear Host of Brithlombar. You may notice that they have a Javelin now. It's basically the same sort of Javelin that the Swordsmen of Talotheran have. It's not armor piercing, they've only got 2 shots with it, but it does add a little bit of extra sort of Talotheran flavor, and give this unit a little bit more versatility, which I think was very much needed because of the changes coming to other units, such as the Marines of Brithlombar, who've been changed to a Harassment Javelin unit. But yeah, so Spears to Brithlombar here, forming the second line, and then in behind them we've got some Marines of Eglarest, who are now a hard target Javelin. So again, higher damage, lower ammunition. That's basically all you need to know about them. In behind, 2 Arankir Lim, Mariners of Earendil, more Marines of Eglarest, and then behind them we've got, I think, one very spread out unit of Marksmen of Balar. And then he's got a couple of the Scouts of Eglarest hanging out up here as well. Now, I think there's 1 or 2 hidden units that we might not be seeing here. I think that would be the Foresters of Brithlombar, who basically are the same unit. They just had their charge bonus increased a little bit so that you can use them as sort of like sneaky flanking units and actually get some value off of them by cycle charging them into combat in and out. But yeah, a really nice army here. One I think Shrek would be proud of, as it has many, many layers, and they're well positioned up here on a hill, which makes them extra dangerous, because they'll have great opportunities to fire their javelins downhill. Let's move on now to the red team. I'll try and move through it a little bit more quickly. There's not a ton of changes, I think, to a lot of the factions on this site anyway. But in any case, we have the Guard around with Doriath, played by Alexander, one of our developers. He's brought Shield Bearer of Region detachments, 2 of them on his left wing. He's got a front line composed of a whole bunch of shield bearers, so a lot of like nice like holding units. Out in front of them, we've got Rangers of the Girdle, 2 units of, and then in front of them we've got some Marksmen of Region. So going a little bit harder onto the missile units, which, not the worst idea when you're facing off against the Talotheran, as we saw with Safi's army here. There's a ton of light infantry and just a little bit of heavy infantry mixed in for good measure. So those missiles will be able to make their mark on Safi's large numbers. Second line here, or rather, yeah, I guess it would be a second line. of reserve units here. Those are going to be composed of Axe Guard of Region, a fantastic pick against the Talotheran and against Safi's build in particular, provided you can avoid the Nobles of Balar from the front, because they grind chaff like nobody's business. So they're going to be super useful against the Seafarers of Brithlombar, the Spearhost of Brithlombar, and any other sort of light infantry mid-tier unit that they can get their hands onto. So this core here of Axemen, great pick to bring, and hopefully we see a good showing from them on the field today. And then finally, reserve units here of Warriors of Region. I gotta say, this army is nicely tailored to fight the Talotheran. The Warriors of Region, very, very fast. The armor piercing is going to make them extremely effective against units like the Aron Lim, Nobles of Balar, especially if they get those nice flanking charges off. And you could just bring so damn many of them. And as an added bonus, all the Doriath, the high-tier axe units, aren't extra fast. So the Warriors of Region are going to be able to cover a lot of ground very quickly and potentially get those much-needed flanking opportunities that's going to make their presence felt on the battlefield. And then finally, we have another line here consisting of both Kuthalim, AP archers, and the Donath and Mablung, who are a very, very strong unit. And yeah, they're 2 HP, heavy armor, they've got armor piercing and a good charge value to boot. They are a little bit expensive, but still, it's very worth it to bring them. And then finally, some mobile units here, 2 mounted company of Region. Altogether, a nicely balanced army from Alexander with a ton of killing power that the Talotheran in a 1v1 I think will struggle to deal with if used well. Next we have the Easterlings from Wally Wolf. They actually didn't get any changes in this, aside from the fact that axe throwers are a really good disruption tool now, as they do have quite high mass. So you can use them to sort of break up enemy advances, kind of screw with their formations a little bit, and just make things a little bit easier on yourself, especially if you manage to get some sort of enfilading fire, rear fire, and things like that. It can just be a total nightmare. But other than that, they are basically unchanged. We've got a couple of Warband of Lothlan here, and a central phalanx composed of Clanguard of Lothlan and Halberdiers of Lothlan. So this is very much the meat and potatoes of the Easterling army here on their center line. They're going for that sort of big dick infantry army, which is understandable when you're playing as Easterlings, as that's kind of what they're best at. Wardens of Lothlan out on the wing. Got some more Wardens of Lothlan here. They do have inspiration bonuses, so when flanking these units here, they're going to help the Phalanx and the other units stay in combat for longer. Got some Salamandrine Guard here as well, a nice armor piercing and like monster hunting unit, although you're not going to see a lot of that necessary in the game today, because the Talotheran and Finarfin field a lot of medium infantry. But still, their projectile, their fire arrow, is really good at screwing with morale, so that's a good thing to have on the field today. Another line here of Marauders of Himring, nice light infantry armed with falxes and throwing axes. They're devastating off the charge, and they're pretty damn fast as well, so these are the kinds of units that you can comfortably cycle charge, even though they are infantry. Next we have the Chieftains Honor Guard, and one of the other units to get an armor upgrade, making them extra tanky and a little bit more defensively oriented, while the Sons of Ulfang still have their niche as offensive armor-piercing bruisers. So, finally, Despoilers of Dor Caranthir, 2 units of them, really strong flanking units. If he can pin things in place and charge into their flanks and into their rear, with the Despoilers of Caranthir, who also cause fear, in tandem with the Salamandrine Guard, there's a lot of synergy there and a lot of potential for causing routes. And then finally, of course, he's got a catapult here, which is nicely positioned up on the hill. And Safi's army is certainly going to want to fear that, because you can see that they're very, very layered up, which is great for an infantry fight. When people bring catapults for that sort of early harassment, then they can actually pay for themselves in the opening moments of the game, so that's kind of cool. Moving on, though, right across from the House of Feyenoord, we have the House of Ingolfin, who have had some fairly decent changes in this patch. A lot of the Blademaster, not Blademaster specifically, but the entire Baird Eiffel tier has been moved down to be high tier medium infantry. So they've gone from 8 to 7 armor value, as I found that they weren't as susceptible to missile fire as I think they needed to be to balance out the versatility that the House of Ingolfin brings to bear. And so, a lot of the Baird Eiffel units have been made lighter in terms of their armor, but they are also a little bit faster, and they do get some extra melee defense because of the way that we treat medium infantry in the mod. So he's got some Blade Masters there out on his wing, He's got a whole bunch of Bladesmen of Bared Ithel in the center. I think we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4 units here, plus some Sons of Hurin mixed in the center. Very scary from the Butcher. Out front, he's got a ton of Ferdsmen, a lot of Edyne auxiliaries here, and they're going to be mixed in with the Sentries of Hithlum, which are a mid-tier pike unit. Potentially very, very strong for pinning things in place, and then going around the wings in order to crush the Feyenoord infantrymen with their superior numbers and their superior sword units. Out front, we have the Marines of Vinyamar, and now, much like OSSIRIAND, the House of Fingolfin lacks a hard target javelin. The Marines of Vinyamar, still capped at 2, are a harassment javelin. So, 2 damage, lots of range, lots of ammo, but they don't hit nearly as hard as the hard target javelins, who have about 5 times the damage these guys do. That being said, over time, it does take a toll, and yeah, these are some really nice units for dealing with light infantry, light shock infantry, and if they can flank them, they can even do decent damage to heavy infantry with the armor piercing. In the back, the final line of infantry reserves consists of Blade Masters of Bared Ithel, and a second company here of the Blade Masters of Bared Ithel. He's also brought the Arquini Findicano legendary company. Armor-piercing horse archers don't have a lot of armor, but they do have great melee defense, and they're pretty damn good at fighting elephants and wargs. The thing that they're really awful at is fighting cavalrymen, however, and that is sort of the big trade-off there. And you can't see them, but he does also have a hidden unit of the Lancers of Anon in Galuth, which is going to give him some mobility and some extra striking power, which is something that we're going to have to really look out for. Because, strangely enough, the House of Feyenoord is outclassed in cavalry here by the Arquini Findicano and the Light Lancers. And then finally, we move on to the fourth and final Red Team army. I bet you're glad that we finally got here. Thanks for sticking with me so far. And that is the House of Halith. They haven't really changed a whole lot. They're still very much the faction that that I've previewed already in several battles. The only real difference is that the Mardrat of Malduin are harassment javelins. So they have 6 ammo, 100 range, and lower javelin damage than the hard target javelins. Which means that the House of Halith, much like OSSIRIAND and like Fingolfin, now lacks hard target javelins. But yeah, so we got Swearterbrother here on the front line, Relentless Sword Infantry. They're also mixed in there with some Huskarlar, who are a medium unit that use infantry templates, but also have some throwing axes. And to make matters worse for both my army and for Feyenoord, we got Ulfheden on the field today, about 2 or 3 units of them, and they're mixed in with this core of heavy infantry. Very scary for me, especially for me, because my spear units will just get destroyed by the Ulfheden, so that's going to be something we have to deal with from range for sure. Skaldmare of Haleth, the legendary company for the Halidin. They are a more armored version of the Berserkers who don't have the same melee stats, but they do have armor-piercing throwing axes, and they've got the Throne trait, so very, very useful against elephants. Ents particularly, if I brought Ents, I'd have to be very, very afraid of the Skaldmare of Haleth because they would destroy them extremely quickly and wipe that like 1500, 1600 florins off the map before it can do anything significant, so I opted not to bring them today. And he's also brought some Wall Shredder Wain Riders, which are a potentially very deadly unit, as we've seen in a few battles already. Yeah, good at harassment. The low number of missiles is sort of mitigated by the fact that OSSIRIAND just takes damage from missiles like nobody's business with that light armor. And he's got some Mardrat of Malduin here, who are a spear cavalry unit mixed with a harassment javelin. And they also use the sort of standard cavalry templates, so they're pretty damn nice. And one of the things you can't see out here is 2 units of mounted Wall Shredder Dragoons, and I think he's also got a small detachment of the dismounted version as well. So he's got a decent enough amount of missiles, and he's also got some hidden Warda and Rigswear with their javelins. They can be very, very scary against my troops hidden here in the forest line. So, yeah, that's going to do. We finally made it to the end of the army sort of introduction. So without any further ado, let's get this battle started. Hope you guys enjoy. And so, upon seeing and sizing up what the Halidin have on the hill, I decided that I'm going to be a little bit aggressive with my Hunters of Rathloriel and my Horse Archers as well. You're going to see them pop out of hiding very, very shortly. And we're going to move forward and try and pressure them off the hill, and also to kind of run scouting, just to see what they've got up here, because I know the Halidin, and I know that there's going to be a ton of hidden units just waiting for me. So we're going to get close, but not too close. Feyenoord teeing off here with a brutal catapult volley into the Finarfin host, which is nice and layered up and kind of asking for it. So you're going to see probably about 60, 70 troops there go down in a single volley. And then, from the other side, we're going to see basically the same thing. Catapult volley here from the Easterling lines into the Talotheran, and that's going to hurt. Some pretty serious damage there. That would have been very, very painful indeed to lose a whole bunch of nobles to that shot. That was nearly dead center on the unit. And Safi is going to kind of realize the danger that he's in, and what he's going to do is actually really smart. So, catapults have difficulty hitting non-stationary targets, and they sometimes have difficulty hitting a target that they are being asked to directly fire at. The best way to use them is to try and compensate for the bullet drop by targeting things behind what you actually want to hit, and that way when the projectile inevitably drops, it's going to drop onto something else in front of it, and you'll get more value from the shot. But moving back and forth is actually a pretty good way to sort of juke out thinner, like sort of thinner lines like what he's got to mitigate the damage when it does actually happen, and then just changing trajectory basically. And you can see that it's still going to hit him there. It's not nearly as bad, and actually most of it just careened kind of harmlessly over top of his host and into the woods in behind, fricasseeing some poor trees who definitely weren't asking for it. They were just here doing tree things, but because of Safi's movement here, he is going to be able to mitigate a lot of that incoming damage while still keeping his formation more or less intact. So he's going to continue to do that. All's quiet over here for Finarfin, but over on my end, this is where things are getting kind of fun. So, Hunters of Rathloriel moving uphill here, and I know that from the front, and in like a straight firefight, the Sentries of Gelion will really struggle to deal with the Weltrider Dragoons. The Weltriders will cleave them apart in melee, and they also have shield values, which mitigates the amount of damage you can cause to them from the front. So, realizing this, I want to try and like bully the Hunters of Rathloriel, or bully them with Hunters of Rathloriel, make them turn around, while keeping my units more or less in place, so that when they are forced to inevitably retreat, they're going to have to do so under a hail of javelin fire. And that's just a pretty good way to deal with the Weltriders. They're expensive, reasonably expensive. They don't have a ton of ammunition, and their armor isn't great, but their shield value is enough to waste a lot of my ammunition and a lot of my time. So I'm going to push forward here a little bit with my sentries. I want to kind of bait these guys back, but I forgot that there was another Weltrider unit up here on the hill, and I didn't see the Weltrider chariots until it was too late. So what we're kind of doing here, let me just sort of break down the formation and sort of the strategy that's going into this, is if you look at my units here, they're staggered, right? So that if I had to retreat, and there wasn't a whole bunch of cavalry bearing down upon me, especially if there's infantry up here, then I'd be able to retreat them in sort of like a staggered way, so that there's always an element of the army shooting while the units retreat, and then I can set up the first unit will retreat to a position sort of behind the last unit, and then these guys will retreat to a position just in front of them, and then these guys will pull back, and we'll just kind of do that while always presenting danger to our enemies from the front. Unfortunately, there's so much mobility on the field, and I don't have anything that can really contest the ground with the Weltrider Dragoons and the chariots directly. I'm going to be forced to just throw units of Hunters of Rathloriel under the bus and try and go for some economical, very favorable trades here. So, Weltriders charging into the Hunters of Rathloriel, it's obviously going to hurt, but because they are spear units and they were like braced and waiting, it is going to take its toll on the Weltriders, and they're going to lose quite a lot of their number there from that. Weltriders here pushing forward to try and bully my Sentries of Gelion out of place. I was very lucky that they didn't rout here, because their morale is not great, and the Weltriders are a very scary unit indeed. You can see the chariots here pushing into my Hunters of Rathloriel, trying to do the sort of traditional chariot tactic of using their high mass to press along the sort of length of a unit and do a ton of damage to them. But because these chariots, unlike the unit that the Halith will get later, don't have a lot of high mass, they're not really suited to close quarters combat, they're not going to be able to do that. They will get hung up on light infantry, they'll get hung up on just about anything and not be able to push through. And so I'm going to retreat my Hunters of Rathloriel here, try and put a little bit of distance between them and these other units here, and then reform them and try and throw backwards into the chariots specifically. All the while, you can see my horse archers in the back here laying down the pain from a distance, firing into the rear of the Welsh Riders or into the rear of the Wing Rider chariots. And it's taking a toll. The Welsh Riders here getting cut down quite efficiently by these units. You can see my hunters here beginning to reload, and they're going to have it. Well, some of the units will have an opportunity to throw their jabbies. A lot of them probably won't hit the mark, but we are making them pay for it. And my Hunters of Rathloriel, my advanced unit here, still have about 35, so they're still able to like present a roadblock, and they're also beginning to reload now to try and inflict as much casualties as possible to the House of Halith. Because my mobility is not strong in close quarters, whereas the House of Halith units are, I want to wipe this mobility from the field if I can by, as I said, getting those sort of cost-efficient trades. And that's going to be enough to, enough damage will be done there to oblige the House of Fingolfin to send up a little bit of reinforcement. So now, Lancers of Anon in Galuth coming that way, and the Haladin, seeing that they have some reinforcements, are now going to turn around and rally. But my Hunters of Rathloriel close enough here to deal some serious damage. I'm going to move up with my sentries again and be super, super aggressive. Now, let's pop on over to the other side here. You can see an attack from the Mounted Company into a Nargothrond sort of advance force, which I'm not really sure why they would do this. They didn't see the scouts of Talotheran and Feyenoord, but it looked like they were maybe going for a frontal charge against the Warriors of Nargothrond, which I don't understand why you would do. So definitely not worth it. These guys getting caught out here a little bit, and now the Wardens of Nargothrond are going to be able to charge in to help them, and the Defenders of Talotheran, those hard target jabbies who can do so much damage against heavy cavalry and hard targets, such as the Mounted Company of Region, are going to be free to throw into a bit of a blob here. And it's gonna hurt. It's definitely gonna hurt. If you look over here, sort of a similar situation on the other end. They mirror each other quite well. Safi going after some marksmen of Region who kind of popped out here in order to shoot at his cav in the woods, but the cav kept on going, Last Samurai style, and charged home into these units, but the Doriathrim elves are able to repulse them and inflict some pretty serious casualties on them as they retreat. Now, if the... Where are they? Oh, they're a little bit too far to pursue, but if the Salamandrine Guard were just brought over this way, they might have been able to charge into the rear of the Scouts of Aglorist and actually rout one of the units off, which would have been great for him, but they were too far away to do so, so the Philothrim will be able to retreat after suffering some pretty gross casualties, honestly, and they're still being inflicted upon them as they run. So, equal trade there in terms of numbers, more or less, for each side, although I think the Doriath cavalry came off a little bit better. And they did manage to cleave through about 30 or so of the Stalkers of Talotheran and Feyenoord, which I guess is a nice thing to do. And now they certainly know that they exist on the field, so that'll give them some idea about what their enemies are planning. So let's pop back over to the other side here. You can see more skirmishing going down. My advanced company of Hunters of Rathloriel basically gets wiped out here. They're going to flee off the field. They're right by the red line, so they're just going to have to get out of there. And that opening is going to give the Haladin cavalry and mobility a chance to charge in to my sentries of Gelion. Luckily, I will see it in time, and I will have the opportunity to get out of there, but they're just not going to be fast enough to prevent the chariots from inflicting some pretty gross losses on my sentries, and because enough of them were attacked, I was unable to, or the unit actually kind of like stops and like turns around. Luckily for me, that would have been really bad there, because those chariots were right on top of my sentries, and they're fast. So they would have been able to just harass them all the way back here, potentially wipe them out, but luckily the Sons of Feyenoord came in, and they're going to be putting down some supporting fire here, and that's going to hurt the Haladin cavalry even more. Now they're going to start focusing on my other unit, Hunters of Rathloriel, down to about 60. I brought the other unit forward here, because I wanted to use the opportunity to maybe shoot at some of these Ward of Brethil, because most of my harassment skirmishers actually haven't been able to throw too many javelins. They have about 80% or so ammunition at this point, and I'm pretty resigned to the fact that they're going to die, so I want to get some damage done if at all possible. But they're going to get attacked from the front by the Welsh Riders. I can see those Lancers coming. I'm going to try and maybe pull them out if I can, and sort of like use the momentum here, but it ends up being a bit of a mistake, and I realized that at the last minute, so I'm going to turn them around and we're going to be firing in with our allies here, the House of Feyenoord, into these Lancers of Adon and Galuth, in anticipation of them beginning to turn around and try and cycle charge. So the second that they do so, you're going to see some volleys come in from both sides, so they end up turning around here. But that's turning out to be a very costly charge for those units. Some Javies throwing in there as well, and they're going to claim the lives of a couple of Lancers of Adon and Galuth. And there's a big old blob of Halith cavalry here, so I'm going to start to switch focus and put as much damage into them as I possibly can. Now, it's hard to tell if this is a mistake or not, because the Riders of the Pass here are going to get engaged in close quarters by Welsh Riders who are quite diminished at this point, but the chariots in there as well are going to basically ensure that these riders are not able to do a whole lot. It does give me an opportunity, though. I've still got 2,400 of Rathoria who are going to be tossing in the whole time. I've got horse archers in the back, and the Feyenoord cavalry sort of getting into a blob fight here in such a way that the Halith are exposed to flanking fires. It's an opportunity, and you can see a lot more of the Lancers of Adon and Galuth now beginning to fall. The Welsh Rider Dragoons are basically down to nothing, and the Halith chariots are starting to finally take some losses as burn through that AP, or HP rather. Lancers of Adon and Galuth here, charging at my Hunters of Rathloriel. They're going to take the charge. Not going to do too horribly there, but it is enough to kind of make them think about maybe beginning to flee, but the trade is not going to be worth it. So this unit here, previously full, managed to get off 1 or 2 charges against one unit, and now it's down to less than half strength. And I can see what they're doing already. They want to go after my horse archers, or maybe they even want to charge into the rear of the Riders of the Pass and sort of finish them off. But it's going to give me more time to just continuously focus fire these units. The Sentries of Gelion looking pretty worse for wear, but there's enough here to deal with a lot of this cavalry and the Lancers getting hit hard. The Arquini Findicano now being forced to charge into combat. They've taken some minor losses from my horse archers as well. And Warda of Brethil being brought forward here to run off the rest of my Hunters of Rathloriel. And I think that's probably been the biggest problem here for the Halidin and their allies, is that we had infantry support and they didn't, and it's letting us bleed them in a very inefficient way for the Halidin that they don't really want to trade in. So over here you can see the Welsh Rider chariots trying to chase off what's left of my horse archers. They will inflict some fairly significant casualties there, but that's going to bring them within range of my Scouts of Gelion line, and we're going to focus fire them down, and that's basically going to be the end of the chariots right here. Last one charging forward, Last Samurai style, getting shot both by foot archers and by mounted archers, and boom, down they go. Warda of Brethil here, managing to rout off what's left of my Hunters of Rathloriel. Over here, I had another unit in there fighting with the Riders of the Pass, which is why they were able to hold on to that for so long. But they will get wiped out there. Arquini Findicano will take some pretty serious losses, down to nearly half the unit, or at least a third of it missing. Lancers of Adon and Galuth, like I said, managed to get a couple of charges off on like 1 or 2 units, but they're going to be down to 12, and as they begin to retreat, my horse archers already on top of them, continuing that aggression with my range mobility. And that's going to cut them down to about 6 or 7, so they're going to lose about half the unit there in that retreat, and they are now basically combat ineffective, and that's going to be a lot of the mobility for the Halidin and for his ally in the center. So we've managed to sweep aside a lot of cavalry. He does still have some reserves here in the form of the Mardrat of Malduin, and now Doriath is bringing in their mounted company as well, which I saw that and I was like, ah, crap. This is going to be a hell of a fight. But luckily, elsewhere on the battlefield, there is a bit of an issue here. So there's sort of like a hard reform in front of the Talotheran and the House of Finarfin armies. I think they were probably trying to do a couple of things. Bring themselves closer to their allies so that there's not this huge gulf that separates them from the other half of their team. And also maybe goon out Finarfin if they can, by combining the forces of Doriath and the Easterlings and then overrunning them as quickly as possible. Big issue though is that they hard reformed basically right in front of the lines, and it's looking like Wally's army is in a little bit of chaos here, super disorganized. Nothing really seems to be where it should be. He's got some Marauders and some Warband out here, probably as a bit of a buffer maybe, or potentially even a miss micro. Over here, the Salamandrine Guard getting skewered by mass javelin fire from the front here. A whole bunch of swordsmen of Talotheran and two or units of them basically opening up. And that's going to bait out a lot of the ammunition, but you're also going to lose a lot of your Salamandrines here. So I have to say, that the red team so far hasn't taken care of their mobility, I think, the way that they need to. Safi also hard reforming, trying to rejoin his ally. I think he's fearing that they're going to double team Finarfin and then he'll be isolated. So he's getting over there as quickly as possible. Catapult from the Easterlings, trying to take advantage of that, but again, moving targets, pretty hard to hit for artillery pieces generally, so that's not actually going to bear any fruit for him, and both of those shots there are going to miss. But if you look at the way that that fight is kind of playing out right now, it's looking like it's going to be playing into the hands of the blue team. Both the Talotheran and Finarfin are in a pretty good spot, I would say. Over here, I can see that Stewie brought forward his Mardarat of Malduin, so my plan here is basically, because I have 2 units, I'm not just going to goon them out, or like, just, you know, make a goon squad, basically, and fire into him from the front. I'm going to try and create some opportunities for myself. So I'm going to move forward with my Sentries of Gelion. I'm going to turn off their fire at will. Same as I'm going to do for these guys. I'm going to try and move them around the wing here and fire into the Mardarat and make them chase one unit or the other. So the unit that's chasing, or being chased, won't be shooting, and the unit that isn't being chased will be trying to shoot into the rear or into the side of those units. So I can see them turning around now and just sort of doing a lot of maneuvering. And I think Stu has probably had enough of it at this point, and he kind of knows what I'm going to be after. And he doesn't want a couple of horse archers in his back lines just endlessly shooting at him because he doesn't have any more bow units. We managed to wipe them out. So that is going to precipitate a general charge here, and you can see that his ally Fingolfin is going to join him in that as well. And this is looking kind of ugly. So Feyenoord moved closer to his ally, so I'm a little bit isolated here. There are some Feyenoord units over on this side. But yeah, I'm a little bit isolated, and that's kind of scary because I can't fight both of these guys at once. The Halith are going to be hard enough for me once they get into close quarters, but throw Fingolfin into the mix as well, and I'm basically like out of the game. Looks like some high tier archers took out the catapults here from the house of Fingolfin. I think they have some marksmen in there that we didn't see. Archers of Amrod trying to do their thing, with the Marines of Vinyamar being brought forward to screen the movement of the left wing of the Fingolfin army, and they're really putting some pressure on these Archers of Amrod. Yeah, that's starting to hurt. And so Feyenoord reforming here, got his ranges of Hellivore in front and center. There's not a ton of really good targets for them. They're going to toss at the Warder of Brethil, who are light infantry, so it's not the most efficient use of those javelins, but honestly, he's got a big-ass army bearing down on him, and he's got to do something. He's got to do something with those javelins, because he's not too sure how long he's going to be able to hold out for. So he's got the Catapult crew here. I think he's got Otor and Mighty Mo. He's got his infantry units, Defenders of Agalon moving forward. They're going to cleave through the Warder of Brethil, not so much with all that reinforcements in behind, but they will certainly do very well for themselves. So House of Feyenoord here taking the initiative, going to carve through Ferdsmen and Bladesmen alike. Up here, Arquini Findicano charging into the Archers of Amrod with a little bit of infantry support here as well. Blade Masters, they're going to shred these guys. These guys will not be able to hold out for a very long time. So Footmen of Amras looking like they want to try and flank around and make their smaller numbers count for more. Good plan. Marines of Vinyamar over here as well, probably still preying upon... Not too sure. I think there's a lot of friendly fire there. Yeah, they're starting to take bites out of their own Blade Masters, so got to be careful about that kind of thing. Footmen of Amras now going to be able to charge into the Marines of Vinyamar, and that's going to do very nicely for them. But over here, just a critical mass of troops charging in. You can see that, yep, I had a little cavalry charge here. I saw an opportunity to smash into the Sweardebrother, hit them hard with my Outriders, cleaved apart well over half the unit. Ulfedin now charging in. Stewie's advance here is a little bit disorganized, and a lot of his units are very, very blobby, which is obviously not a good thing. Warda here trying to flank around, but there's not a lot of them. My Scouts of Gelion, I'm pulling some of them back, and again, trying to stagger them and keep them spread out so they can't all be shut down by just 1 or 2 units of infantry. I can also see a big old gap here forming in my line, so we're going to bring the Kinsmen of Death forward to try and plug that, and I see that now is the time for me to bring my Urfinen Tower forward. So I'm going to charge forward here at the Warda of Brethil and against the weakened Haladin right wing, and to try and even the odds here a little bit as best as I'm able. Meanwhile, I've got all of my missile units in the back, firing, picking targets, trying to focus on blobs if they can. This unit in particular here, I think, is going after the Ulfedin, because they're very exposed right now. I think these guys are going to be pulled out so they can get a better angle to do much the same. Over here, ton of Swear to Brother, fighting against my Spearheads of Brithlombar, overwhelming them, kind of scary. And now I'm going to start to bring forward my my other units. Another Galleon unit has been brought to my right wing in order to put some pressure on the Rigswear who have shown up, and they're a very easy target. I've also brought my Urfin Tower over here as well to try and support my ally, try and just basically fight a holding action here and make this as painful for them as possible. Huskarlar taking javelins to the face, not something you want to see them do. Over here, I've also got some Outriders of Dweilwyn getting up close and personal with another unit of Huskarlar. They're going to kill about 40 of them off that charge there, and that's very nice for them indeed. I'm going to follow that up with an attack from the Urfin Tower just to keep them pinned in place and make sure that they can't fire at my Outriders as we retreat. Again, we're using that sort of pin and shoot strategy that I spoke about a little bit earlier, but I'm also using some cavalry here to make things extra dangerous because there's no way that I'm ever going to win this fight straight up. It's just not going to happen. I don't have the resources as the Green Elves. Too many spear units. Kinsmen of Death are being brought into the center. I can already see some bad things beginning to happen, and because of where they are positioned, they're going to be able to inspire both of these units of Spearmen of Brithlombar, and they're going to be able to hold for a very long time. And they can see those Ulfwiden coming forward, so they're going to countercharge here and just go right for them. They're quite weakened at this point because of a lot of missile fire. And in the back here, still trying to make the most out of my Outriders of Dweilwyn. I know that if I can eat up some of the Halith infantry reserves, I can maybe eke out a win, or at the very least severely weaken them, because this is like a nightmare scenario basically for the Green Elves. It's one that we planned for, but it's nonetheless not a very comfortable place to be when you are Green Elves. Over here, got my Randirum. They're now out and about, and they're starting to begin to fire. I think with this big old blob here, my Urfin Tower, front and center, carving apart Rigswear. There's also a good opportunity for them to lay down some fire here as well. So I can see Ulfwiden, I can see lots of stuff over here. Starting to focus fire a little bit, bringing out the Hyando. Probably not the best use of their ammunition, but the Ulfwiden, I really want to kill them. They're the biggest threat by far. My Urfin Tower here can get charged from behind, and there's not a whole lot that I can really do about that, except to make their sacrifice worth it by continuing to focus fire on my missiles. But let's pop on over to the other side of things, and there's some really interesting stuff at work here. So the Easterlings were in complete chaos, and Feyenoord charged downhill at them while they were still trying to like reform, and basically ended up coalescing into the battle line that you see right here. Now, Doriath has moved forward with a couple of their axemen, but if you look, the Doriath cavalry has actually been brought behind the lines here, and I think that this is kind of a mistake. This is a fight that they're already winning very handily. This cavalry is not needed. Where it is needed is over here on this wing and trying to create enough local supremacy that you can break the wing and start trying to roll up the lines of your opponents. And that's, I think, the most important thing. He's got all the tools here. He's got lots of warriors of Region, though they are kind of blobbed up. But if they could get behind here, that would be devastating. He's got Donathan Mablung on the front line. He's got a lot of the pieces in place exactly where they need to be. But he's blobbed up, and he doesn't have important mobility, which he, I think, has maybe now recognized. And he's going to start to bring them to bear. But like everything that he needs to do the job right is here. The tools just aren't being used to their fullest effect. Whereas, in contrast, if you look on the other side here, Feyenoord has taken the brunt of the Easterling assault. There's a little bit of Doriath reinforcements in here. There's some like Axgard and some Warband of Lothland, but there's just a huge blob of the Talotheran, and there's just not enough of the red team troops here in order to really deal with this effectively. Some scouts of Eglarist over here getting into the rear of the Salamandrine Guard, never something you want to have happen. Salamanders will win in a straight fight, especially in a situation where they outnumber them, but if they get that rear charge, it's going to be a very, very different story. Alex does have, of course, some missile units here that he can use to exact a dreadful toll from the Talotheran, but Safi has basically everything here. He's got high ground for his skirmishers. You see the Rangers of Brithlombar and the Marksmen of Balar as well are well placed. He's got reserves, and he's starting to surround and destroy much of the Easterling army. And he's doing his job like quickly, also reinforcing parts of the line that seem to be like failing. So a nice little flank charge here from Wally Wolf with his Despoils of Caranthia. We're starting to carry the day, but now he's going to move in with some Seafarers, and they're going to start to bring that back. Pardon me. Just a little bit stuffy. Over here, the Doriath cavalry kind of doing what they need to do. but I think it's too little too late. If they had been over here and they didn't like use this sort of window of opportunity that they had to win a fight that wasn't important, then they could have done a hell of a lot more with this cavalry, and this would be like a very critical situation for House Finarfin over on this side. However, with some reinforcements from Feyenoord, surprisingly enough as well, a small detachment here of a footman of Amoras fighting on the front lines. Even with those reinforcements, this would be like critical, and they'd both be sort of in similar situations where they're rolling up each other's lines and then moving into the center. So the mounted company here, they're also going to charge into some of the scouts, which just, it's not the right target. It's definitely not. Quinny Mormagilwa are right here. A rear charge into them, even with melee cavalry, it's going to hurt like hell. At the very least, it is going to oblige some of these troops to kind of pull out. We've got another unit of them over here fighting toe-to-toe with defenders of Talotheran. Again, not worth his time. He has 2 units of mobility here, and he could use those very, very nicely. He could just shred the scouts instead with fire from his marksman, which he's doing, but he's also committing mounted company to the cause as well, and it's just not worth his time. Popping on over to the other side, things are kind of scary. So my Randirim have done some pretty crazy work so far, but the cavalry leftovers from both the house, actually it's just both House of Fingolfin units, Arquini Findicano, and some of the Lancers as well, taking a serious toll on them. They're down to about 40% strength here, and that's going to really impact how much damage they can do moving forward into this battle. And Arquini Findicano over here as well, but they're coming under fire from my Ondo Hyando, and that's going to eviscerate the unit there. Just look at them die. Armor-piercing units into already low armor units like this, who are unshielded, and yeah, like I said, just don't have heavy armor to stand up to it. Basically, nightmare for them. So my Outriders of Dweilwyn managed to get a few good charges in the rear here, kill off about 114 or so men, but now they're being brought to try and support my Rangers. I'm going to move my Rangers into the protective screen of these units, and while all this is happening, I've also got scouts of Gelion up on the field, so combined arms here, along with the mobility of the Randirim and Togolen, and that's going to allow us to shut down everything else that they got here, with the exception of this one lonely Mardrat. I don't know, a few Mardrat moving forward. We'll be able, of course, to hopefully squeeze off a shot here before they impact with them, and then tie up our Rangers for a second time. Yep, bunch of shots going to go off there into the flank and rear of the Swear-to-Brother. It feels bad, man. They're going to feel that in the morning for sure. Some of the Swear-to-Brother are going to fall on the front lines. Spearmen of Rathloriel putting up a heroic defense. And in the center here, we actually managed to beat back the Ulfheden with our range units supporting the Kinsmen of Death, but at great cost. Lost about half the unit there, even to an under-strength and quite heavily harassed unit of Ulfheden. So it really does give you an idea of how much power that unit has. Kinsmen of Denethor now coming into close contact here with the Skaldmare of Halith. It's the bodyguard unit. If we can kill the bodyguard, maybe we can get rid of some of these other units, but it's just ugly for us right now. We've still got some of our scouts, but they're starting to run low on ammunition at this point. They've done as well as can be expected, but numbers are needed here in order to make sure that the Kinsmen of Denethor can hold their ground and potentially to assassinate the Halidin general. And it's just a mess, basically everywhere here. See some missile fire supporting the Spearmen of Rathloriel. There's a few Urfin and Tower here as well, enough to blob up what remains of the Halidin, and it's devastating for both sides. Like, neither of us are going to have an army left when all is said and done here, but my Rangers, still online, managed to beat back the assault there from the Mardrat. I've now turned them around. I can see a flanking movement here from House Finarfin, trying to get behind my ally, and it's at this point when I realized just how hard-pressed the Feyenoord army is. They've done really well here because of some good deployments. There's some price wearing here as well. Didn't realize that. But the defenders of Agalon they're being overwhelmed, and there's just a lot of pikes, especially in the center here. You can just see this critical mass of Fingolfin units, and they're well poised to break through the medium infantry there. And now they've got even enough troops to flank around and cause some problems. So we're going to lay down some pain here with my Rangers, and again, I'm going to throw another unit under the bus. Ondo Hyando, going to do what they do best and charge into close quarters against these Blazemen. And around the same time is when the Feyenoord army, their front line starts to fall apart. So a nice charge here, some supporting fire from on high as well, some overwatch from the Scouts of Gelion, and these Bladesmen are going to meet a pretty sticky end here. That charge value off the Ondo Hyando is no joke, but unfortunately, this is where their army starts to break. You got Sons of Hurin here, and they're going to roll up the line that's being held together basically by Otorn Mighty Mel and the general and the inspiration that they offer them by units. Rangers of Hellborn here are about to collapse. Defenders of Agalon now too chewed up to really be a threat to anybody. And this is just going to be it's going to be a matter of just trying to deal whatever damage we can and hope our allies are doing okay on the other side. Because at this point, there's fog. I've been so busy microwaving, I have no idea how we're doing over on the other side. So I'm just trying to slaughter whoever I can and just take away whatever numbers I'm able to from these troops. Rangers here starting to prey on Sentries of Hithlum. Hondo Hyando going to charge here against the Blade Masters. They chewed up that unit of Bladesmen from like 90 down to like 26. But they're actually going to be overwhelmed here. Again, they're not a high-tier unit. And this much stuff coming at them, no support in close quarters, they will actually break it with about 60 or so men left. And my Randir, I'm going to pop off maybe one more shot, or try to. Actually being pressured now, I think, by some of the dismounted Waldstrider Dragoons. And that's pretty scary. They could kill them, and I almost lose the Rangers here. Very, very close to just being routed off. Up here, still have some Scouts of Gelion, very close to being out of ammunition, but they have a decent amount left. They're going to cover the Rangers and deal the damage, whatever damage they can, really, as the House of Fingolfin surges forward. Over here, my Spear Host trying to hold the line, but Swear Brother are slowly but surely destroying them. Some support here from the Scouts on the second line is going to make sure that that's a costly victory. But over here in the center, we're actually not doing too bad. Scouts of Gelion, along with the Kinsmen, doing well against the Skaldmer of Halith, managing to kill about half the unit. Over here, with the support from archers, we managed to crush what was left. So we've got about 11 Urfin. Enough here to get behind the Skaldmare and surround them and kill off the general. And then, yeah, we have this big blob of troops here. And that's when I lost my general, and I was like, ah, crap. I'm done for. Just totally done for. My Scouts of Gelion going to receive a charge from, I think, a small band of Ulfheden, but it's not going to be enough. And some of these survivors of Stewie's Halidin army are going to move in and engage them on the hill, but this is pretty significant here. My units are fresh, and a lot of these units are exhausted, winded, or, yeah, exhausted. So they actually will be able to hold on pretty well here. And, of course, they've got Rangers in support, don't they? Marines of Vinyamar getting preyed upon by my Rangers, trying to do what damage I can. I'm going to pull my Rangers back, and then I'm going to see a brilliant opportunity here. Fighting uphill and with Ranger support. Yep, they're going to turn around and they're going to unleash hell upon the Huskar Lar. So things are pretty gross. More Fingolfin units and Halidin units charging up here. And we're going to make a similar stand with our Rangers, but the Scouts of Gelion, but the Rangers are well positioned to support both. And that's going to be key here. So popping on over to this side, Doriath and the Easterlings are basically being defeated. And it's the flanking movement from the Talotheran that has kind of caused this to be the case. The Doriath forces ended up petering out and suffering really heavy losses. There's still some here. You can see a couple, there's like warriors. I think there's like a couple units here of the warriors. And also marksmen, and pretty sure there's some Kuthalim in here as well, or the Kuthalim are maybe over here. Oh, the Donatham of Belong are over here. But most of the Doriath units ended up petering out, and that's because the window of opportunity was lost. There was just too much time spent trying to do a whole bunch of different things, and I can understand the impetus to want to support your allies the way that Alexander was. But they were already winning this fight over here, and those cavalry should have been focused on breaking these units quickly and creating the sort of critical mass needed to basically do to the Talotheran and Nargothrond what they did to his ally, Wally Wolf. And yeah, so that opportunity was lost, trying to do too many things at once instead of focusing on accomplishing one task at a time. And the Easterlings have really paid for it here. They were in chaos, and they basically just got flanked by the Finarfin army that they were way too close to, and they weren't organized, and yeah, just Doriath did their best, I think, to support them in whatever way they could, but it just didn't end up working out well for them. Over in the back here, it looks like some Axguard being overwhelmed by Marines of Eglaris. That being said, it looks like they managed to cleave apart a significant amount of Talotheran light units here. Like I said, they're total meat grinders. There's some, I think there's some Rangers and some Brithlombar spear host in here as well. And they were obviously supported by the Spearmen of Eglares, but those 3 units in tandem ended up being too much for this unit of Axe Guard, though I'm sure they did very well for themselves. And Fingolfin is going to be forced to bring the majority of their troops up here and try and take a position on the hill, and that's going to be important for them, but we need to acknowledge some of the differences between both sides here. So, Fingolfin, pretty worse for wear, lower on numbers. The Talotheran, they're going to come out of this pretty well. There goes the Easterling General, and that's basically it for Wally Wolf in this game. But the Talotheran have come out of this reasonably well, and most of their stuff is winded or warmed up, but like not exhausted, right? So they've had the fatigue advantage, but they have a positional disadvantage, whereas because he needed to get over here so quickly, a lot of these units who were tired had to run uphill, and now they're going to be completely exhausted, and they're going to be suffering a lot of penalties. But that being said, it will allow him to take this hill position, and that's going to allow him, hopefully, to make better use of his numbers and maybe pull off some kind of miracle. And that being said, Doriath isn't finished. They're finishing off what remains of these of the Nargothrond troops here up here on the hill, and then they're going to pull back and reunite with the Cuthalim, and they're going to make a stand here on the Fingolfin left wing, and that's not going to be easy. Of course, these guys don't want to get flanked, and if Doriath is able to effectively use their numbers and the hill position, and especially the Cuthalim, absolute beasts in close quarters, then that's going to allow them to hold on to that left wing and exact a pretty devastating toll. Also, Sons of Hurin, still very healthy. They normally got about 52 or so men in the unit with the banner carriers, still at 45. Tired, but very healthy unit nonetheless. But if we look back here, Butcher left enough, what he thought would be enough to kind of like deal with what I had, but my Scouts of Gelion here, along with the Ranger support, have cleaved through a lot of these things. And now Randirim and Tolgalen able to fire into this blob over here, and these Scouts of Gelion are going to be able to hold off this assault. And so we've managed to bleed a lot of numbers that could have been very useful up there on that hill, probably to the tune of about, I would say, at least 300 troops, for sure. My Randirim now coming under close quarters assault here. I don't want to leave them in battle with the Huskarlar. They could probably beat them, but it's just a waste of the numbers, and they're already down to 22, and 12 Rangers can't really get a whole lot done with that. So I'm going to retreat here, pull them away, and the Huskarlar are going to follow me, as you would expect, trying to keep these guys from firing. But eventually Stewie is going to see it. There goes the Halidin General as well. That's pretty important. So Stewie is going to see it, and then he's going to realize there's no way he can catch the Rangers, as they are a good deal faster than these medium infantry, and he's going to turn around, and then we're going to basically execute them by firing squad. Over here, we killed the Halidin General, destroyed the rest of the Skaldmare. A lot of the Halidin units that were still fighting the good fight are now going to break off because of that. And there's Marines of Vinyamar down here, which are a little bit scary, but this is kind of most of the infantry that they have left. They're tossing into my Scouts of Gelion. That's going to hurt, but these Swordsmen are not going to be able to stand their ground for very long. Look over here, Huskarlar getting shot from behind. Nothing you want to have happen to you when you're medium infantry facing down Rangers. And now 3 of them are going to make it back here, and they'll be able to charge into the rear of my Scouts of Gelion. Over on this side, Halidin have been run off, and now the Marines of Vinyamar are going to do their best to make a stand. And they're going to toss at my remaining Scouts of Gelion. It's going to hurt. Probably going to lose about half the unit there, I would think, if not more. Many of them will get knocked over, and that's going to slow them down, give these guys an opportunity to maybe throw again. Nope, they're actually out of ammunition. So, 2 remaining companies of Scouts of Gelion charging downhill here. Marines of Vinyamar are going to countercharge. Kinsmen of Death are moving in as well to make sure that morale stays stable. They do still inspire. Even though we lost our general, they can still be useful. Those Marines of Vinyamar are being overwhelmed. Scouts of Gelion here have basically killed everything. And the Randirim, probably my MVP for this game, are going to survive with 22 left. 22% combat effectiveness, but at this late stage in the game, that's a pretty big deal. Now, speaking of big deals, if you look here, they're actually doing pretty well, especially the Warriors of Region and like the Cuthalim and stuff. Let's see if we can find them. Yeah, the Cuthalim have just made a mound of bodies around them, and supported by those warriors This is not a fun fight for the Talotheran, but a lot of the light infantry here has managed to overrun the Fingolfin left wing, and they're going to move for a full surround. And some of them are actually going to chase down some of the Talotheran Mablung. They routed off with about 40 because everything else, you know, fled around them. They were exhausted and surrounded. But they're going to have enough units to spare here to continue to chase them, make sure they don't come back. 40 Talotheran Mablung would almost certainly have reformed and then have been able to potentially launch attacks from the rear as these light infantry move in for a surround. Fingolfin was winning for a while along with Doriath.
Lies dead, slain by the enemy. We must help his men avenge him.
There goes the Nargothrond general as well. But because this flank, again, the Talotheran and other light infantry on the wing are just, they're effecting a full surround, and this is not something that House Fingolfin, wow, too many F's in this game, House Fingolfin is going to be able to stand up to, especially when so many of their troops are exhausted and they're beginning to get demoralized. That being said, over here they were winning. In fact, I think still are winning. There's a lot of their striking power concentrated here, but Scouts of Tara and Falroth going to have an opportunity here to go for a surround, and the Bladesmen won't mind, but the exhausted sentries are not going to appreciate that. Their morale is a good deal lower, and they are very exhausted. And so this could be the straw that breaks the camel's back here and then sends this wing into retreat. And now some of those Bladesmen being pulled out to try and reform and meet the advance of these Scouts of Talotheran and Falroth. But that's going to leave the footmen of Amaras here able to come in from the rear and then surround them again in turn. Meanwhile, in the center, the crush is unbelievable. You can see the Sons of Hurin in the center there making mincemeat of the light infantry and the medium infantry as they do, even taking down a good number of the nobles there. But there's just too many enemies, and they just weren't able to hold on to their left. Aron Kirlim and other really important units. Some Arqueni Mormagilwa still in the fight. Cuthalim now surrounded with King Thengol on this hill, coming face to face with Turin Turambar. About to duel with him, in fact. The Black Sword, the Mormagil himself. Marksman there. Trying to cleave into poor Thingol. He's just getting boxed around by those different units. Just unable to attack. He should have the non-stagger animation, which is apparently something I need to fix. Turin in the background there, cleaving one of the Cuthalim, burying his sword in the Elves of Doriath. In the story, these two were very close. This is quite the emotional reunion here on the battlefield. The rest of the Cuthalim still killing away. And they'll continue to do so until such time as Thingol falls, and then I think will be enough to break their spirits for good. Oh, damn. Look at that. Told where to go and how to get there by one of the Arqueni Mormagilwa Knights of the Black Sword. And now in the center, it's basically all over. Now, if we look at the percentages here, about 10% difference. This was a potentially very even fight. And I think the biggest issues... There was probably 3 fairly decisive moments in this battle, I think. The first was the way that Wally Wolf had deployed his troops down here in the valley. He basically ceded a hill advantage to Nargothrond. His army was in total chaos and just wasn't able to put up nearly as an effective resistance as he would have otherwise been able to. He would have been able to cover more ground, maybe hold off the Talotheran over here as well. The second big thing I think that did the red team in was the use of the cavalry over here. Alexander had the right idea, and that's why it's so painful. He had all the tools. He had 2 units of axemen there. He could have thrown one of them sort of into the center and into the flank of the center, like right here, to support his ally, but they ended up kind of blobbing up here on this hill and not really spreading out using their numbers effectively. He had the marksman up here, but this is again why you don't want to blob up and want to use your numbers more effectively. 1 unit of axemen here and another right down here would have allowed his marksmen a buffer basically to reposition and do what they needed to do, whereas throughout the battle they would get attacked by various infantry units and that would expend their strength. And then finally, using his cavalry over here to like fight and support Fingolfin, which I get it, good idea to support your allies, but not using them over here to quickly like gain the advantage, and retake the initiative and start to roll up the center line here, which would have saved the Easterling army, or at least part of it, and allowed them to fight the Talotheran on a little bit more of equal terms, was kind of the big thing as well. The other one, which I think is a little bit smaller, is the exchange that we managed to force with the mobility from both House Fingolfin and from the Halith up here on the hill. It was obviously very costly. It cost me my horse archers, cost me my my harassment skirmishers, who barely managed to throw off like 20% of their ammunition before they were destroyed. But we were able to bleed the Halith of some really important mobility, which would have ended the infantry fight right away and allowed them to flank what was left of Feyenoord, and then it would have just been, you know, dominoes after that. They would have had just so many troops. I wouldn't have been able to put up the resistance that I had against the Halith and against House Fingolfin as well. And I guess we'll throw a fourth one in there. One minor thing is that Butcher, and I can understand why he did this, he left the troops there that he thought would get the job done, and I don't think he accounted for my Rangers. My Rangers managed to basically swing that, and I cost them about 300 or so troops, who would have been pretty important up there on that hill. So making sure that your enemies are completely finished before moving on to the next thing, I think was a mistake that was made there, but that's more of a hindsight thing. Like, he had pressing concerns with trying to maybe save the Easterling army and link up with what was left of Dordiath, and then putting up a stand up there in the hill. But this is a super long video, pretty satisfying, I think, to play and to watch. Take a look at my casualties here, and you'll see what did the damage. I mean, my Kinsmen did okay. 103 is not bad. A lot of that, I think, was Uffidin, so extra good there. Hunters of Brithlombar didn't do a lot, but that's almost entirely cavalry kills. So it doesn't look like a ton, but it is significant for the reasons I outlined. My Rendiram and Tolgalen, 217 kills, really, really nice. Spear Host of Brithlombar did just kind of okay. They're not really the killing power, but they held like you wouldn't believe, especially with the support from the Kinsmen of Death. Scouts of Gelion, that's where a lot of my killing power comes in. Urfin Tower did really well. Sentries of Gelion didn't do a lot of like damage kill-wise, but again, a lot of that it's cavalry kills, so it does make a difference for sure. Ondo Hyando, despite being overwhelmed and in a bad position, and I kind of needed to throw them under the bus, they got 117 kills, so not a bad performance there for what happened. The Outriders of Dweilwyn, 114, but Stu did a really good job at shutting them down. We didn't really see it because there was a whole bunch of other important stuff going on elsewhere, but he did manage to shut them down really nicely with the Mardrot. I had drawn the Mardrot out with my horse archers and like attacked them on two different sides, and reduced their numbers down to about 24, but inevitably lost my horse archers. But they came back, and with the Shield Maidens as well, who were using their ammo on my Lancers, he managed to stop those Lancers from getting 300-400 kills and potentially like outright losing the fight with the Green Elves, rather than what ended up happening, where we basically just destroyed one another and there was no like clear victor necessarily. But in any case, hope you guys enjoyed that. My name is Jordan, also known as JMonster. If you guys are interested in finding out more about the mod, check the links down in the description. Join our Discord server. We're pretty friendly. Always happy to have some new people in the game. But yeah, hope you guys join me next time. Take care, everyone.